Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. One of the things you guys sent in recently that I was really curious about was all this new research on walking. I mean, it's walking,
Yeah.
right? Like, how much can there really be to say about walking? But getting into this stuff, I found it was really fascinating. And today we're going to be talking about all the different ways that walking can actually be this incredibly powerful tool for things like fat loss and living a longer, healthier life.
Hmm.
Especially if you're someone who, like me, finds those really intense workouts tough to keep up with.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are surprised when they start to really dig into the science behind walking. It's easy to dismiss it as, just basic movement, but there's a lot more going on.
So let's unpack this.
Yeah.
One of the things that you sent me was this YouTube video from this fitness expert.
Yeah.
And he did this experiment where he actually measured his calorie burn and what he called fuel utilization. I guess like where his energy was coming from during a 10,000 step walk.
Yeah, and the results were pretty interesting. He ended up burning 418 calories from that walk, which is a decent amount on its own. But what was really fascinating was that 51% of those calories came from fat.
51%. Wow, I have to admit that really caught my eye too.
Yeah.
And then in the same video, he did this crazy intense cycling workout. He burned way more calories overall, but only 21% came from fat. So even though he's pushing himself way harder, his body wasn't using its fat stores as efficiently, which, I mean, that's kind of counterintuitive, right? I always thought you had to like really work hard to burn fat.
Right. It really comes down to how your body uses its different fuel sources at different intensities. So at lower intensities, like, a brisk walk, your body can easily access and burn stored fat. But when you really ramp up the intensity, your body starts to shift towards using stored carbohydrates for that quick energy.
So for someone whose main goal is fat loss, you're telling me that a good walk could be even more effective than something like a crazy intense spin class.
Yeah, that's right. And there's also another big advantage here, which is sustainability. Walking is something you can do day after day without feeling totally wiped out. So it's much more sustainable for most people than those really intense workouts.
Totally. I definitely been there, tried those crazy workout programs, and honestly, it just wasn't realistic long term.
Mhm.
I'd get burned out or injured or just kind of give up.
Mm.
And you actually touched on something important there too, which is the safety aspect. That expert in the video, he even mentioned cases of like rhabdomyolysis, where people are working out so hard that their muscle tissue starts breaking down.
Exactly. High intensity exercise definitely has its place, but it's not the only way to get results, and it definitely comes with some risks if you overdo it. Walking, on the other hand, can give you a lot of the same benefits without those potential downsides.
So we've established that walking burns fat effectively and it's more sustainable.
Mm.
But how much walking are we talking about here to actually see those benefits?
Well, one of the other things you sent me was some research on those Japanese studies looking at step count and longevity. And not just lifespan, but what they call health span, which I love. It's not just about living longer, it's about living well.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Nobody wants to live a super long life if they're not healthy enough to enjoy it.
Right. These studies found that taking even a minimum of 2,700 steps a day significantly reduces your risk of dying prematurely. But the real sweet spot for maximum benefit seems to be more like 8,800 steps or more. Imagine being active and independent well into your later years. That's the goal, right?
That's an awesome goal.
Yeah.
So it's not just about, fitting into your genes. It's about being able to live your life to the fullest, even as you get older.
Exactly. And walking actually helps with that in more ways than one. So we've talked about the fat burning aspect, but it also plays a crucial role in maintaining muscle mass, which is super important as we age. In fact, the studies found that people taking less than those 2,700 steps had a much higher risk of mortality.
60% higher, to be exact. That's huge. So it's not just about losing fat. It's about preventing that age-related decline and staying strong and functional.
Okay.
I'm convinced walking is way more powerful than I ever gave it credit for. But I'm wondering, are there ways to make our walks even more effective? The video you sent mentioned something about supplements and diet.
Yeah, so the expert talked about things like L-carnitine caffeine, green tea extract. But honestly, for most people, making changes to their diet is going to have a much bigger impact.
Okay, so let's talk about food. You talked a lot about insulin and blood sugar.
Right. So insulin is this hormone that regulates your blood sugar levels. And when you eat a lot of sugar or refined carbs, your blood sugar spikes, and your body releases insulin to bring it back down.
Okay, got it. So how does that tie into burning fat?
Basically, when your insulin levels are high, your body is more in storage mode. So it's focused on storing energy, not burning it. So by keeping your insulin levels stable, you're essentially creating an environment where your body is more likely to tap into fat stores for fuel.
So it's not just about how much I'm eating. It's about making choices that don't send my blood sugar and insulin On a roller coaster.
Exactly. And that's where the practical advice comes in. So the expert recommends focusing on minimizing things like refined sugars and processed foods, all those things that cause those big spikes.
Makes sense. And what about protein? You seem to be a big fan of that.
Yeah, protein is your friend when it comes to fat loss. It helps stabilize blood sugar, it keeps you feeling full, and it's essential for building and maintaining muscle, which we already know is super important. He even mentioned a study where people actually ate more calories overall, but because they increased their protein intake, they ended up losing fat and gaining muscle.
Wait, so eating more could actually lead to better results?
That's crazy. I think I might need to rethink my whole approach to nutrition.
It's all about working with your body, not against it.
This is great stuff. Okay, before we move on, there are two other things from the video that I wanted to touch on briefly. The first was about walking in cold temperatures and how it can actually boost your calorie burn. Right, when your body has to work harder to maintain its core temperature, it burns more energy.
He even mentioned a friend of his who lost like 20 pounds just from mountain climbing in cold weather.
Yeah, of course you have to be smart about it and dress appropriately. But it's a cool example of how a little bit of cold can actually work to your advantage.
And then the second thing was about walking speed. Turns out walking faster can actually make a big difference.
Yeah, the expert recommended aiming for a heart rate that's about 50–60% of your max heart rate. That's a good starting point.
So instead of just focusing on hitting a certain number of steps, we also want to think about the intensity of those steps.
Exactly. It's about challenging yourself enough to get those fat-burning, fitness-boosting benefits.
You know, I'm really starting to see walking in a whole new light here. It's not just about getting some fresh air. It's like a serious health and fitness tool.
It is.
And speaking of fitness, you mentioned earlier that walking helps preserve muscle mass, which is something we all start to lose as we get older. I know it's important. But can you break down why muscle mass is so crucial, especially for us as we age?
Yeah. So it's about way more than just, looking toned. Muscle plays a vital role in so many things, from how strong and mobile you are to how well you burn calories, even at rest. And as we get older, we naturally start to lose muscle mass. It's called sarcopenia, and it can really have a big impact on your quality of life. You might notice this with like your grandparents, maybe. They start to get a little bit frail, have trouble getting around, things like that.
Now that you mention it, I have noticed that with my own grandparents.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely not as steady on their feet as they used to be.
Yeah, it's sadly pretty common. And what's concerning is that this loss of muscle doesn't just affect how you move, it also affects your metabolism. So muscle burns calories even when you're just sitting around. So less muscle means your metabolism slows down, making it easier to gain weight and harder to lose it. It's like a double whammy.
So it's not just about being able to, lift heavy things. It's about maintaining a healthy weight as we age too.
Exactly. And that's another area where walking can really be beneficial, especially if you pick up the pace. Brisk walking actually helps stimulate the process of building and repairing muscle tissue.
So by getting those steps in, we're basically sending a signal to our bodies to hold on to that precious muscle mass. Like we're fighting back against that natural decline that comes with aging.
Exactly. And remember all that talk about protein being important? Well, combining regular walking with enough protein in your diet creates this perfect environment for your muscles to thrive.
So picture this. You're out for a brisk walk, your heart's pumping, your muscles are working, and you've got this nice protein-packed meal waiting for you when you get home. It's like a recipe for healthy aging.
I love it. It's all about making choices that support your body in the long run. And the good news is you don't have to be a marathon runner to reap these benefits. Even small changes add up over time.
That's really reassuring. It feels manageable,
Yeah.
like something I can actually stick with. Earlier we were talking about heart rate and those target zones for walking.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, all the numbers and percentages made my head spin a little. How can people figure out what those target zones should be for their own walks?
It's actually simpler than it sounds. There's a good rule of thumb you can use. So first, you subtract your age from 220. That gives you a rough estimate of your maximum heart rate.
Okay, got it. So let's say someone is 40 years old. They would subtract 40 from 220, which leaves them with 180.
Right. And then to find your target heart rate range for a brisk walk, you take that 180 and multiply it by 0.5 and 0.6.
So that would be 90 to 108 beats per minute for a 40-year-old. But do we really need to be like checking our heart rate every few minutes while we're walking?
Not necessarily. The goal is to get a sense of what that moderate intensity feels like. So think of it this way. You should be breathing a bit harder than usual, but still able to chat with a friend without gasping for air.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about finding that sweet spot where you're pushing yourself a bit, but not completely out of breath.
Exactly. And remember we talked about how walking in cooler temperatures can give your calorie burn a little boost. Of course, safety and comfort come first. No one wants to be out there shivering.
Yeah, no need to turn your walk into a polar expedition.
Yeah.
Just something to keep in mind if you're looking for that extra edge. Now, I have to bring up something else that the expert in that video mentioned, something called Zone 2 training. It sounded pretty intense, to be honest. Is this where we trade in our comfy walking shoes for something a bit more hardcore?
Hold on, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Zone 2 training definitely has a bit of a buzz around it these days, and it can sound a little intimidating, especially if you're new to all this.
Yeah, when he started talking about like specific heart rate zones and training for endurance, I thought, wait a minute, I thought we were just talking about going for a walk.
I get it. But before we jump to conclusions, let's break down what Zone 2 training actually is and how it might fit into the bigger picture of walking for fat loss and longevity.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So Zone 2 training is all about keeping your heart rate within a specific range for a longer period of time. We're talking about 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate.
So we talked about target heart rate zones earlier for brisk walking, and that was 50 to 60%, right? So Zone 2 training is bumping things up a notch.
You got it. And that little extra push offers some unique benefits. It's amazing for building what's called your aerobic fitness, basically how efficiently your body uses oxygen.
So we're talking about building stamina, being able to go longer and harder without feeling wiped out.
Exactly. When you consistently train in Zone 2, you're training your heart and lungs to work like well-oiled machines. And that translates to better cardiovascular health, more energy, all sorts of good stuff.
That's impressive. But I have to ask, is this something that's only relevant for like marathon runners and serious athletes? Because I'm definitely not training for a marathon anytime soon.
Not at all. While endurance athletes love Zone 2 training, it can be incredibly beneficial for anyone who wants to improve their overall health and fitness. It doesn't matter what your current fitness level is.
So even if I'm just starting to get more active, incorporating some Zone 2 training into my walking routine could still make a big difference.
Absolutely. It's like this, think of brisk walking as building a strong foundation. Zone 2 training is like adding another layer of strength and resilience on top of that foundation.
I love that analogy. So it's about pushing myself a little further, taking things up a notch once I've got that base level of fitness established.
Exactly. It's all about finding what works for your body and your goals. And here's the cool part. You can actually achieve Zone 2 intensity through walking. You just might need to adjust your pace, maybe add some hills or inclines to your route.
So it's not about turning every walk into this crazy intense workout.
Yeah.
It's about finding that sweet spot where you're challenging yourself just enough to reap those Zone 2 benefits.
You nailed it. It's all about finding what feels good and what you can sustain.
Okay, all of this is amazing information.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. There's brisk walking. There's Zone 2 training. There are all of these different heart rate zones to think about. Where do we even begin? How do we figure out what's right for us?
I hear you. It's a lot to take in. It's easy to get caught up in all the details and feel like you need a degree in exercise science to go for a walk. Here's a simple framework to help you navigate all this.
Okay, I'm all ears. Okay, give me that step-by-step plan. All right, so last time we were talking about how easy it is to get a little overwhelmed with all the different ways to walk, and you were about to give us a plan to help make sense of it all. What's step one?
Well, first things first, let's get that walking habit established. Aim for at least 30 minutes of brisk walking most days of the week. That's your foundation. You know, for fat loss, heart health, just feeling good overall.
30 minutes most days of the week.
Yeah.
Got it. So that's like our base.
Yeah.
Thing we make sure we're doing consistently. What about all that Zone 2 stuff we were talking about? Where does that fit in?
Right. Once you've got that consistent routine going, then you can start playing around with some Zone 2 training. Remember, it's about pushing yourself just a little bit harder. So, try picking up the pace. Maybe find some hills to walk up. You could even experiment with things like interval walking, where you're switching between high and low intensity for a set amount of time.
So it's like leveling up our walks once we're feeling good about that baseline 30 minutes. But how do we know if we're actually in that Zone 2 sweet spot? Is it all about how our breathing feels, or is there a more precise way to track it?
You can definitely go by feel, and that's a great place to start. If you can talk, but you're breathing a bit harder, you're probably in the zone. But if you really want to dial it in, a heart rate monitor can be super helpful. Remember, we're aiming for 60 to 70% of your max heart rate.
Okay, so high tech or low tech, there's a way to figure it out. What if someone's just starting out and even that 30 minutes feels daunting? Should they try to jump into Zone 2 training right away, or is it better to build up to it slowly?
Slow and steady wins the race every time. Listen to your body. Don't push too hard too soon. Build up gradually. If you're just starting out, maybe that means 15 minutes a day, then 20, then 25. The important thing is to make it a habit, something you enjoy and can stick with.
That makes a lot of sense. Consistency over intensity, especially at the beginning. And it's so inspiring to think that something as simple as walking, which we often take for granted, can have such a profound impact on our health and how long and well we live.
It really is. And we've covered a lot of ground today. The science of fat burning, the importance of muscle mass, how to fine-tune our walks to maximize those benefits. It's been quite a journey.
I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm honestly excited to get out there and put it all into practice. What's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I want people to see walking not just as exercise, but as this powerful tool for living a longer, healthier, and more fulfilling life. It's about moving your body, connecting with your surroundings, taking time for yourself.
Beautifully said. It's about so much more than just the physical benefits. And all of you listening, thank you for coming along on this journey with us. We hope you feel inspired to lace up those shoes and hit the pavement. Maybe try a brisk walk today. Pay attention to how you feel. Maybe even find a hill to conquer. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep walking towards a healthier, happier you. Okay. Until next time.